We'll just take a minute or two so our participants get admitted, and we'll get underway. Thomas, I should introduce you to our Dean, Professor Sudarshan.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for joining.
Right, so the participants are all coming in. We wouldn't get many from my constituency, traditional constituency, which is North America, because it's probably 4 o'clock in the morning or something in North America. So, but we will get from Asia, and I would imagine others would join. But let's get started now. I think we should get underway. So welcome to all participants from all across Asia, and hopefully from other parts of the world as well. I am Naresh Singh. I am a professor and vice dean in the School of Government and Public Policy at the OP Jindal Global University, where I also direct the Center on Complexity Economics, Applied Spirituality, and Public Policy. So you can say from that name alone, you can see the deep interest we would have in a book like this that has been authored by Thomas Legrand, who is currently based in some exotic part of the south of France. So welcome to all of you. First of all, let me welcome our panelists. Thomas, of course, the author of the book that we are having an Asian launch, Sarah, Divya, and Dean Professor Sudarshan. We'll start today's program, and maybe I should just say that please feel free to use the chat box and post any comments, questions, and so on. We will monitor that and get those questions answered, although we would have adequate time for people to unmute and personally contribute to the conversation after the short presentations that we would have around the table. So these will be pretty short. That's the whole plan, so that we have enough time for the conversation. Let me start off then with a short introduction and welcoming remarks by our Dean of the School of Government and Public Policy at the Jindal Global University, Professor Sudarshan. Over to you, Sudarshan.
Thank you very much, Naresh, and nice warm welcome to Thomas Legrand, and to talk about his fascinating book. Nothing could be more timely at a situation when we are coming out of a pandemic. There's enormous concerns around the world about the fate of the planet and the fate of democracies, the rise of populism, internecine conflicts, ethnic, religious, regional, linguistic. This is probably one of the worst periods in history, actually, and it's time for a very desperate and a real. I mean, there is a fate that fundamental changes in the way human beings organize themselves come about when confronted with multiple crises that cumulatively put people in a very, very grim situation. The increases in inequality, the palpable failure of the neoliberal capitalistic economy, the fundamental questionings within the discipline of economics as to where it has taken us, where has it brought us to this state. These are all important and very pressing questions, and so it's like a breath of fresh air to have some thinker like Thomas Legrand, who's thought about this and interacted with a number of people in different parts of the world, and emphasizing that it's possible to get out of this morass or the quagmire, and that the way to do that is in a way to encourage everybody to look within for a start. I think, we are very fortunate that Naresh has joined us. He joined us last year in January. The school itself was started in 2012 as a School of Government and Public Policy. And it's the first school in the country that took in undergraduates and gave them a master's degree. And now we even have an undergraduate degree in public policy. And alongside it, we have economics. So one of the aspirations is that, for public policy to be meaningful, the way we understand and apply economics would also have to substantially change from what it has been. So we are still a young university. The university itself started only in 2009. It's now got about 8,000 students and about 1,000 faculty. So it's grown very rapidly since it commenced. But we are, I would describe our situation as, sailing the boat while building it. And the planks that we need to build this boat, an important one, if you like, even the rudder would be your ideas, Thomas. I think that's something we need to be incorporate in our curriculum, in the way we teach our students, the way we get to think about the world. Our mission is to get students to think critically, but they need to be given some direction. It's otherwise we could be thinking about lots of things that don't add up to much. So to have a well-structured thesis about how the politics of being could come about is extremely valuable. And I hope that we'll incorporate your thoughts in our work in the university and beyond our school through the whole of the university, because you need many more people to come together to, there's got to be in this field at least a critical mass to bring about some change. Otherwise, we've always had brilliant ideas. India's had the Dalai Lama living with us since the 50s, a very wise man, but even his public appearances become conditional upon what the People's Republic of China says and what India feels it should do diplomatically with the People's Republic of China. So what I mean by that is that, all of you have all of these complexities. We have all of these, naysayers. We have extreme pessimism. People think that some of these ideas are faddist. They're just, fashionable. This is what new age gurus keep pontificating about, and don't see the connection between the fundamentals and what follows from that, which is action, right? So I think therefore we need to, mobilize many more constituencies that join in and begin a process of thinking. I started my career working in the Ford Foundation in New Delhi, and the first conversation I had with somebody who was an advisor to the Ford Foundation was Dr. Kamla Chowdhury. Now, she was a person who played a prominent part in the Indian Institute of Management, one of the first Indians to study psychology at Harvard. And she, first conversation I had in 1984, 1st of January, with her. And she said, what's missing in all of this development business that we are into, Ford Foundation included, is spirituality. I mean, there's a whole dimension of human existence, which does not have to do with just keeping, the body focused, but something that has to do with consciousness and the mind. And there's absolutely no reference to it. And so, so she's an advisor to the Ford Foundation, but all of these big organizations tend to get into, and into their ways of doing things, emphasizing for instance, measuring results, log frames, that kind of thing. And then I left the Ford Foundation. I was so inspired by the Human Development Report published in 1990 by UNDP that I joined the UNDP. But then I worked there for 22 years and in different places, India first, a number of years, and then Indonesia and the Oslo Governance Center, and in Bangkok. Now, I had to say to Helen Clark, who was the last of the administrators that I worked under, she put out a slogan saying that UNDP should go from good to great. Now, Good to Great was a title of a book on big corporations in the United States that, like in the case of Enron, of course, going from good to great meant becoming bankrupt because of serious ethical flaws in its governance. So I wrote to Helen Clark and I said, I joined UNDP because I thought it was already a great organization. And I was hoping in all these years that it would become a good organization, good in some holistic ethical sense. And so you change your slogan from good to great to good. And I'd be very happy. Now, it didn't go down very well with her. Nonetheless, that it's been a quest. And Thomas, you're now in the UNDP, they're listening to you. And that's a big start because it still remains an organization with presences in so many countries that some of these ideas can be moved into different countries through the medium of an organization like that. So you can count on our university, the Center for Complexity Economics, Applied Spirituality and Public Policy, and others, to be fellow travelers in this, common pursuit of, if you like, human well-being. I've always thought that the American Constitution's statement about the pursuit of happiness ought to have really been rewritten as the happiness of pursuit of material things. That seems to have defined it. And so to get back to some understanding of what the world now needs would be vital. And so we look forward to this conversation and to take this forward. And I'm very grateful to Naresh and Divya for helping us put this event together.
Well, thank you very much, Dean Sudarshan. It's now my pleasure to ask the author himself. I see the Dean has recognized your engagement with UNDP. So it's three of us, it seems, who have had some engagement with UNDP over the years. But Thomas, as you know, well, maybe I should let the audience know as well that Thomas will also be engaging with our new course on sustainable development policy and applied spirituality, which will start, in fact, on Monday. And Thomas has kindly agreed to be a guest lecturer on this course. But Thomas, without any further ado, let's turn it over to you to share a few highlights from the book. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Sudarshan, to open this conference. Thank you very much, Professor Singh. It's a great pleasure to be with you today. We have a dedicated ASEAN launch for this book, and I think Eastern spirituality been very much important for me and as an inspiration for this book. I'm based in France, next to the monastery of Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh, who has had a great influence on this work. And I'm also, the book builds a lot also on other teachings, such as those of Sri Aurobindo or Gandhi. And the subtitle of this book is Wisdom and Science for New Development Paradigms. So it's also very auspicious to do this ASEAN launch with Jinpal Global University. So we're trying to weave the two systems of knowledge, let's say, wisdom and science. So Yes, I've prepared, maybe I'll share my screen. I've prepared some introduction to this reflection. Should work like this. So yes, and before starting that, as we mentioned, our common experience with UNDP and the need to bring these elements of wisdom, spirituality into the development conservation. I'm happy to mention that at the moment I'm working with a new initiative we call the Conscious Food Systems Alliance, and people tells us it's surprising to find this work conscious and the kind of language that we use in this initiative in UNDP. We see from there we are partnering with different thought leaders trying to weave this reflection about the need for inner development to support the kind of transformation we want to see in societies. So I think, you know, these ideas are getting more and more recognized at the global level by thought leaders. They are making their ways. So that's also should be very give us hope about you know, about the future, because as we will see, I think there is this recognition that we are in a very, as you said, Professor Sudarshan, we are facing now many crises, and it seems like what we need is a very deep cultural change to really change the way we operate collectively, the way we relate to our lives, and this notion of progress or development, about what we really value as individuals, but also as societies. And I think this cultural evolution is somehow in nature a spiritual evolution, and that our institutions could support it. So, and indeed, you know, that is the last Human Development Report published by UNDP in 2020 recognized that nothing short of a wholesale shift in mindsets is needed to navigate the brave new world of the Anthropocene. And the Earth Charter 20 years ago was already talking about a change of mind and heart that we need. So that's why I say of a spiritual nature. And as the Dalai Lama mentioned, he said the fundamental problem is that at every level we are giving too much attention to the external material aspects of life while neglecting moral ethics and inner values. So as you mentioned, we are facing a very deep crisis, and I think this is an evolutionary crisis. So an old system is dying and a new one is wanting to be born. And that's why the old system is, let's say, bringing us towards health, to paraphrase what Harari say here. And the new one could bring us into a very much better world, or heaven, could say Harari. So what are these different, these are cultural systems. Charles Eisenstein calls them story, like every culture articulate a story around by bringing answers to very fundamental questions over life, over who we are, what we are coming from, or potential, etc. So the old story, he calls it the story of separation, and that comes from mainly Western modernity and the kind of worldview it brought us, and some specific values like materialism, individualism, reductionism, anthropocentrism. So, and they see the main program for societies is to master nature to fulfill our material needs, and individuals are considered, are seen as material self-interest maximizer. So with, you know, this notion in economy of the homo economicus, that we are only pursuing our material self-interest. So it may have come from Western modernity, but through globalization, through colonization, and then globalization, it is now spread in a lot of part of the world. And what we are, and this has been backed by some science, especially in the 19th century, etc. And now we have new science, we have new new answers to new ways to look at these questions, new values, and that can weave an emerging story, which is called the story of interbeing. And we will see, I will come back to that. There's a good science telling us that indeed our thriving depends on how we can all thrive as one Earth family. So, and the individuals needs to become a responsible member of the Earth family. So that means we need also a new development paradigm that accompany this new this cultural shift. This has been recognized, including by Ban Ki-moon. There is a widespread recognition, and now even more with COVID, that all systems cannot cope with the challenges that we face, and we need a fundamental redirection of our efforts for progress. So we need a development that is more sustainable, more qualitative, more human, more integral. But basically, at the root of that, there's the recognition of a fundamental reorientation, let's say, from having or economic growth towards being. And some sociological work, for example, the work of Ronald Inglehart, who has been coordinating the World Values Survey for a lot of time now, show that with economic progress, we have seen a move in rich countries from materialism to post-materialism, and more fundamentally from survival to self-expression. That means, you know, this notion of economic growth this kind of cultural shift is calling for a new priorities, more around, for example, self-expression, or what I call being. And indeed, there is this sentence from the Earth Charter that says, when basic needs have been met, human development is primarily about being more, not having more. So that's what I call the politics of being, is a new development paradigm that focus on being as our main collective goal and means, because, you know, spiritual teachings tell us that we cannot separate really the goal and the means. So I will come back to that. By being, I mean also all beings. It's not only about human beings, but we have to consider that all beings have the right to be. And it should support our institutions. Society should support the expression, every individual expression of their full potential. And what I mean about being is about our truest being. And that's really the spiritual nature of that, how we can realize what we truly are, and also the healthy aspirations in the world that comes from that, what we want to offer to the world, and also our highest being, let's say the virtues and qualities that philosophers have always told, from Aristotle to Confucius, that good society should be able to support the cultivation of these virtues. And the politics of being, as I said, is nourished by a dialogue between wisdom and science. So wisdom basically gives us the direction, and science tells us, you know, make sure we are going on the right way, how to do that, is that a correct interpretation of spiritual teachings, for example. So basically, it's about the politics of being, it's about realigning our institutions with what sages would agree that our true reason to be here on Earth, becoming who we are, the best and most complete version of ourselves. And some people, when we talk about this need for a collective shift in consciousness, some people say it will take a more bottom-up approach, where each individual is going through its own process and maybe at some point, make fundamental changes in their lives, because maybe they come in touch with a spiritual practice or something. Here, the reflection is more about how institutions can provide the right conditions, or societies can provide the right conditions for this to happen, and that can create a virtuous circle with institutions providing favorable conditions for being, and individuals then having the wisdom to adapt and refine their institutions in that way. And indeed, I build on the work of Elinor Ostrom, who has been the first, maybe the most influential institutional scholar at the moment, and she has been the first woman to receive the Nobel Prize in Economics. And she say, basically, we thought a lot about, we assume people are selfish, like the Homo economicus, and we design our institution based on that. And that, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Then our institutions make people to act as selfish. But rather, she said, we need to build now institutions that support the best that brings out the best in humans. And she said, that's our main, that's what she learned from 50 years of research. So, for example, I often use that example of justice systems. In many countries, we have what we could call a paradigm of retributive justice. So whoever makes something wrong needs to be punished, and that is justice. But there is also an alternative. So it tends to rely on our instinct for retaliation, which arguably is not the best thing that we have. No, it's a human. We all have this potential as human beings, but we also have another potential for compassion, for understanding, and which is at the basis that an alternative justice paradigm, which is restorative justice. So a quick theory of change. Why is this so important for sustainability and collective flourishing? So basically, our systems right now is really building on disconnected, I would say, egocentric individual. And science tells us, so that has brought capital accumulation. That's the way our economic systems work. But it has brought also a lot of environmental and social destruction. And we see even a lot of human suffering, because and disconnecting egocentric individual not only does harm to others, but is also experiencing a lot of suffering himself. On the other side, what sages have been telling us about their fundamental spiritual experience in everywhere in the world, in every culture, is quite similar in terms of experiencing a unity with all that is, that we are really part of all that is. We could put it different names: unity consciousness, oneness, interbeing. So that gives us understanding of what is our spiritual nature, and how spiritual evolution can bring where it can bring us, and how it can be important for sustainability, for reconnecting with others, oneself, and nature. And what's interesting is that science is telling us that indeed our happiness stems a lot from our connection with ourselves, with others, and with nature, and of course sustainability also. So we see really that's the way to go, and we can reconcile our own happiness with the happiness of other beings on this earth, as we take this path of spiritual evolution, of being, expressing our true nature, cultivating the best version of ourselves. So in this book, I've tried to map where this new perspective is emerging under very different names, but behind all these research, because there are science on all these values, they're called spiritual values, and they're also being applied to more and more to politics, social change, etc. And we see like different groups of people, different constituencies, that the politics of being can provide a common framework for all these people to work together and provide a new vision for societies, for the evolution of our societies. So there is Zeus, for example, coming from systemic, integral, and complex thinking, and the interdependency of all that is. There are Zeus, talking about life and how we should harmonize ourselves with how nature works, including in our social, economic organization. Zeus emphasizing happiness, including experiences in Bhutan, for example, proposing happiness as a new development paradigm. New research and actions around empathy, compassion, etc. Peace, how we UNESCO has had an important program on the culture of peace. We have had UN resolution on that. Mindfulness. There is an important report in the UK by a group of transpartisan members of parliament for UK mindful nation. The potential of mindfulness to support the evolution of nations, etc., etc. And when I tried to make sense of all of this, I just realized that these were kind of spiritual values that reflect what a spiritually evolved person, the qualities of a spiritually evolved person. And I found out there was, including in Western philosophy, already a tradition to see these higher values that have been conceived also as a reflection of God or of the absolute, like in the case of Platon, transcendentals, truth, goodness, and beauty. And some other philosophers have said, Hegel, for example, said that freedom was the direction of our societies because it expressed the main quality of the spirit, etc., etc. So what I've proposed in this book is a very concrete, that was also important to say that we can be very concrete on that in terms of public policy proposals in many sectors, which I framed as, let's say, a second stage. We have a first stage in human development. Investment in human development was more about the outward aspect in terms of education, health, nutrition, etc. But there is more than that in human development. There is also the inner part, which we could focus on to complement existing policies. And also, embodying also the interbeing paradigm, which at the same time cultivate our human, social, and natural potential while answering or bringing answers to the solutions to the challenges every society face. So just to conclude, I see the importance of trauma both at the individual, at the collective level, and research tells us that really traumas are what impedes us to be what we are or true nature. As I said, wisdom and science as the pillars of the politics of being. I've tried to propose, my objective has been to develop a strong rationale based on science, rooted in the mainstream conversation on sustainability that can be understandable by decision makers and average citizens, providing a simple but integral conceptual framework, offering concrete policy recommendations, mainly based on existing examples. So it's not something that I'm imagining. There's a lot of pieces that are already there, and framing really a new field of research and action in this aspect. So it's a collective endeavor. So you feel free to join and support this work. You have the website here, and we have a foreword by the book comes with a foreword by Mathieu Ricard. And just to conclude, just wanted to highlight some key considerations on my side on the Asian context. So, as I said, I think Asia has, in history, has been a very important place for, spirituality. There's a very rooted in the culture recognition of the importance of spirituality. So, as the leadership of the world is slowly moving toward the East, we can see an opportunity for the politics of being to be recognized as a new development paradigm. And indeed, we have some seeds that are already happening in Asia. And I've talked about the gross national happiness of Bhutan. China has also committed to become an ecological civilization, which, of course, has some resonance with his own spiritual background and Taoism, for example. But there also, as I said, now the importance is to find this kind of balance between wisdom and science. I think that's very much needed. So there have been some discussion about, Asian values and different paths for Asia. And there, I think I've taken these quotes from the book, where it says, like individuals, when nations flourish and develop higher qualities and values, they contemporaneously express their uniqueness and universal nature. So it's a very thin line, between what is you become what you are, but at the same time you become more universal. So Asian values sometimes have been a little bit instrumentalized to say that human rights and democracy may not be, so adapted to Asian context. So I personally think human rights are very important. Democracy, as I mentioned in the book, is in crisis, but can also be reinvented. And that's what people really want. There are different models, maybe more balanced, that can bring together some institutions from the East and some institutions from the West to have a more balanced form of democracy. In some Asian countries are still not materialized, economically, let's say, not rich. So we need our basic needs fulfilled, but we need also to respect the ecological limits. So materialism also has come also from the West. So maybe it's also important to consider Asian values also in relation to materialism. And also just be aware, as I was, using these quotes of the nationalistic pitfalls. So when I traveled myself in India 10 years ago, I think more or less, it was really interesting for me to look at all these great teachers from the Indian Renaissance, Sri Aurobindo, Vivekananda, etc., etc. And what they were always saying is that they needed to free India, not for itself, but because India has an important role to play for humanity. So that was to me very very interesting. So that was a positive, let's say, kind of nationalist movement. And also, as I was mentioning, the importance of trauma. I think the trauma of colonization and the kind of political dynamics and international relation dynamics. And you look, for example, at China and how what happened in terms of Western occupation, the Opium Wars, etc., in now bringing China to assert itself and trying to take some dominant approach is very important to look at this into trauma. And into trauma, if you look at some leaders, even of, even if you look at the individual story of a leader like Xi Jinping in China, it's a very tough story, I won't go into details, but it really echoes this kind of individual traumas, also echoes collective traumas, and brings us into dynamics that are really not healthy for how nations should live together in the 21st century as one global family. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Thomas. That was really succinct but yet comprehensive overview of your book. Raises a whole range of issues, and I'm particularly pleased that you have highlighted two things. One is the theory of change, and the other one, some concrete policy implications, because as a school, we are clearly interested in that. Let me also, before I make some comments, brief comments, let me just encourage our participants to post any, I know there is one question already posted on trauma and wanting to learn a little bit more about that area of the work. But I encourage others as well to post any questions, any comments, and so on, which we will have enough time to answer. Let me make a few comments as well before I turn to our two colleagues, Sarah and Divya. So the first one is on the objective, a new objective, if you like, of development. And this objective, as Thomas has outlined, is being. Now, those of you who are familiar with international development cooperation would know this, but not all of our participants are. So let me do a 1 or 2 minute recap of how development objectives have evolved over time since the Second World War, if you like. I will do these 70 years, these 7 decades in less than 2 minutes, so don't worry about it. So the first objective of development seems to have been economic growth, more and more economic growth. When there were challenges and issues and social objectives were not being achieved, we then had social development as the objective of development. And then that did not seem to deliver the goods either. So then we got into what has been called socio-economic development. And you will see as this was evolving, where it's all headed. After socio-economic development was not, had all kinds of flaws as well, which we soon discovered after about a decade of practice, we then started to talk more about human development and then more about basic needs aspect of human development. While all of that was going on, the forests of Sweden were being damaged by acid rain generated from other countries. And so we had the first conference on the human environment in 1972. And that conference led to the establishment of this World Commission on Sustainable Development. The Brundtland Commission, which was established in 1982 and delivered his book called Our Common Future in 1987, tried to bring environment and development together. And so we had this sustainable development paradigm being launched globally and politically in 87, but operationally 5 years later in Rio in 1992. And we had the world then embarking on the trajectory of sustainable development. So we've been on this pathway for a long time, and we don't seem to be getting anywhere near the goals that we all agree on sustainable development. We are making some progress, and I should acknowledge that, but nowhere near the amount of progress that we need to make. Now, if you notice this paradigm that I'm talking about, this evolution of the objective of development, it was always based on some form of having all along. And you can see as well that what we were trying to do in these various evolutionary paradigms of international development has always been how to patch up the disadvantages and weaknesses of the prior decade or paradigm. And so sustainable development itself is an attempt to merely patch up a fundamentally flawed development paradigm based on more and more growth and having more and more. And so one can see that the entire development paradigm has been like this. For the first time, I would argue, we are now proposing a fundamental break from that kind of development to the development objective of being, of supporting life, than of supporting more and more having. Now, having in a certain way might be necessary. And the world has, the last estimate is just under 1 billion people still living in poverty, and they don't have all the material needs that they need. And these people obviously should have the material needs. But many others have all the material needs that they can ever hope to have, and yet are looking for more. So that's what I would argue is a fundamental dramatic shift in the objective of development, being rather than multiple forms of having more and more material and more consumption. Now, how do we make this shift? And we have heard both from Professor Sudarshan and our friend Thomas Legrand, the author of this book, how to do it. Let me just make a few quick observations and then turn to our colleagues. One is, if one takes the Wilbur integral approach, which Thomas mentioned as well, you have in that 4 quadrants in the integral approach, he talks about individuals and collectives, and interior and exterior, and that gives you the 4 quadrants. Now, most of public policy takes place in the collective exterior. That's where we deal with public policy. That's where we deal with complex systems. That's where we deal with development and indeed sustainable development. Over time, we have made the link between the collective exterior and the collective interior, which is culture. And that one is being made, that link is being made through anthropology and cultural studies. We've also made a link between the collective exterior and the individual exterior, and that is behavioral science. And so we are talking more and more of behavioral economics and behavioral science and public policy. Indeed, our university, our school is going to be teaching a course on behavioral science and public policy forthcoming very soon. The one missing dimension you see in these 4 quadrants is linking the individual interior with the collective exterior, where public policy happens. And that is what we need to do, and that is what I would argue this book is all about, and that is what the course that we will be teaching, this new course on applied spirituality and sustainable development policy, will seek to do. Theoretically, again, we have had IQ. We all know about IQ, right? Intelligence quotient, which measures human reasoning, individual reasoning, to a large extent, a proxy for human capital in some ways. We have had EQ, emotional quotient. And this emotional quotient is linked to social capital. And we know the importance of both human and social capital. This book portrays very well the idea of spiritual intelligence and spiritual capital. And that now forms the base for this complete package, if you like, moving from IQ and EQ to including SQ, and having a solid and much more comprehensive understanding of the capital base that we can then use to think and talk about sustainability. If we only deal with flows and not stocks and the capital base, we will never be able to either understand or indeed to make public policy which can address sustainability. Let me conclude by making a few points then on public policy applications and then turn it over. In fact, it was many of these were made by Thomas. The one I want to zero in on is nations. How do we, as the nation state, of course, there's a lot of debate on the value of the nation state at this time and whether that is still a valid socio-political construct for the world going forward. But be that as it may, it is what we have to work with now. And in the book, Thomas, well, first I should say the points I have just made are very well summarized in his 2 boxes towards the end, boxes 13 and 14, those of you who have the book. If you look at those, great summaries of the main points, the core messages of the book, and the key characteristics of spiritual capital. But as nations, he moves to give us a range of recommendations of a nation's cultural and spiritual roots and the relationships between these and how these need to be, if you like, nurtured in order to support a national or nation culture evolution. He talks of how we might start very practically and pragmatically by the organization, for example, of a consultation process backed with relevant scientific techniques, including national surveys with well-intentioned and competent people, and so on, to collect data, including psychometric measurements, in order that we might make all of these understandings. And indeed, in a country like India, to which he also referred, this phenomenal spiritual wealth and legacy seems to be in danger of not influencing the way this country evolves and moves forward. So there are a bunch of pragmatic, practical recommendations. I wouldn't go through each of them, just to make the point that they are there and they guide us in terms of how to pragmatically begin this agenda and to move forward. I like one of the quotation, and I will close on this. One of the quotations he uses from a French writer, the French writer says, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up the men to gather wood, divide the work, and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. That for me is what we now need. We can envision a world, a new world, one built on a higher level of consciousness and awareness of our own true nature and reality. And that world is there, it's evolving. We would need leadership, we would need public policy, we will need individual and collective movements towards that. Let me just leave it at that with those comments, and I'd like now to move to our friend Sarah. Sarah is from the Philippines. Sarah has been up, I believe, from early hours and in some hotel lobby having a coffee. But Sarah, please join us now. And I like what you do, you know, about this, the design thinking that you bring to building resilience and recovery. So let's hear a few thoughts from you, Sarah, before we go to Divya to bring the next generation. Sarah, over to you.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Hello from the Philippines. Can you hear me well? Great. Namaste, and good afternoon to probably most of the people awake in Asia. I'm just in the same time zone as maybe 2 hours ahead of you guys, but yeah, and also 7 hours ahead of Thomas. Thank you, Thomas, Naresh, Divya, and the rest of the people who organized the event. And I'm really, part of me is wondering why I'm here, but I'm actually also really inspired, you know, as I was reading the book of Thomas. And I've always been wondering how to kind of find the language and the courage really to speak for the interior conditions, the inner dimension of change making, which is not often, you know, recognized. And I think it's emerging now. A lot of the change systems and approaches are coming together to bring that together. And this emerging, especially now as we look into decolonizing development, decolonizing approaches to regeneration, and as our systems are, as Thomas was sharing, and Ban Ki-moon was also sharing in his quote, as the systems is changing. The systems are changing. Sorry, I'm a little distracted because of the noise here, but I'm gonna try my best to speak. And I'm also really inspired because of the courage of oh, sorry, why did I share my screen there? I was taking notes. I'm really inspired by the courage that Thomas put together. Of course, it's probably easier because he's done a lot of this background in his work. But for me, I don't know if I'm really well established enough to really come from that. You know, like I've done this and that, and we've found this path already, and this is more important now. But But as I've been doing this work as well in systems thinking and regenerative design, always found that cultural dimensions and the consciousness are very key to design thinking. And when we go deep into the iceberg model or going into the mental models, it's really how we perceive the problem, which is the problem in the first place. And so at the heart of it is the perception, and behind that is our consciousness. But at the heart of it is also the purpose of the person behind it. It's not just, you know, your own consciousness, but how you perceive the world, and what is your intention when you come into approaching a problem. So, and I am quoting some of the things from Thomas' book. The book is coming from the merging of wisdom and science, and the need for wisdom to guide our nations. And for us, we know wisdom is really the application of knowledge. And so to be honest, you know, for me, I find it hard to read a lot of the white papers or a lot of the documentation to prove that we need to do something, because a lot of the things that I'm guided on is really listening to the grassroots and listening to indigenous peoples or people on the ground, and see how they embody the change. And so in our work in bringing traditional ecological wisdom in our in regenerative design, where we work using permaculture and agroecology in addressing food, livelihood, and climate resilience, we see them embody this wisdom. There's a lot of tacit knowing that they're just doing it. You know, there's not a lot of talk and how to do it, but it's really just embodied. And wisdom is like that. And for us in the Eastern traditions, you know, often where our knowledge is passed on orally and are passed on by actions and stories. And so, and a lot of it is really in application. And it's really, for me, coming from the Asian lens and maybe partly Pacific as well, is we have this wayfinding process of, you know, trusting our intuition and wisdom, and even dreaming and visions, you know, to guide us along the way and make the changes that need to happen. We read the landscape, we read the people, we sense, you know, beyond just what we see. And it's also just a practice of embodiment. So, and I like what Thomas also said about our politics should turn inward to address the question of cultural shift, and a shift, and more precisely, a shift of consciousness. I think about how Joanna Macy, a deep ecologist, a Buddhist whose roots practices from Buddhism, she talks about the great turning, where to navigate the great turning, we have to fight against the system that needs to change. And then that's not just enough. We have to show the alternative to that system we're fighting. But she's also saying it's not enough, because at the end of the day, it's still, we need to shift the consciousness, because that's at the depth. You know, we can always just think about the structural change, but without the consciousness change, we cannot sustain the change we continue to, you know, we're pushing for. That the hard times will come on. You know, I think about Greta Thunberg. You know, every Friday she's up there. Like, what sustains her to keep on showing up? And that is the drive. You know, how her consciousness is rooted deep into a really deeper purpose and mission. And I think about greenwashing as well, because, you know, we go into the green, changing our economies to sustainability, but if at the end of the day it's just replacing more shampoo bottles with biodegradable shampoo, but it's still the same number of bottles, the shift in consciousness is not there. It's just a greener, like a biodegradable content. So we have to change our consciousness so that the system changes rapidly, and we need that rapid change now, but not rapid in such a way that it's faster, but it's systemic change that's scaling up wide, but also deep, that goes into our purpose, the relationships we're building, the trust we're building across change makers. So for me, I also for me in Asia, so I'm part of the UNDP Conscious Food Systems Alliance, where I work with Thomas there, and I represent the Global Eco-Village Network Oceania in Asia. And in the last, I've worked with the Global Eco-Village Network for a while, and many of us in Asia have been wanting, like, how can we honor the roots of regenerative design of Asia and the Pacific? And because a lot of our worldviews are actually coming from that holistic approach to how we see our relationships to ourselves and nature and our cosmology. And so we designed a design lab where it's also a leadership course, and then looking into the cultural, social, economic, and ecological dimensions of design. And it's and we brought out, like, what are the wisdom traditions of Asia. So we brought, like, in the Philippines, we have these roots on kapwa, which is like everyone's familiar with Ubuntu, like I am because you are, but in the Philippines, our sense of Ubuntu is called kapwa, which means the shared self. So there's no, like, sense of, like, I'm separate from you. I'm always connected with everything, even in nature and in in others. Like, if you meet a Filipino who's everywhere in the world, by the way, they ask you where you're from, and then she's gonna think of, oh, my cousin is there. It's like as if the place is so small when we just try to find links and connections. So that worldview of connection is really foundational to our change making process. We have this principle of bayanihan, or nation building, which is foundational to our sense of democracy, which inspired, I think, many Asian nations as well when we have the People Power Revolution in 1986. And we brought about the wisdom of the Buddhist economies of Vietnam and Thailand, which inspired mindful markets. A lot of the organic farms and social enterprises in Thailand are really founded on the self-sufficiency economy that's founded on Buddhism, and then the right livelihood teachings also of the Buddha, and of course GNH in Bhutan, that propelled their goals for carbon, to go carbon neutral or negative in the future. But yeah, and we also brought in the wisdom of Confucius, where in China lots of the eco-village movements are bringing back the wisdom of the teachers. And the rise of the donut economies. Sorry about that. My emails are starting to flood. We have no internet because of the typhoon, and now I'm just in the hotel, so now my emails are loading. The donut economics, Kate Raworth, who's popularizing this economic model. But there's also the wisdom of the indigenous worldview of the donut economics, the circular worldview of indigenous people. So we invited the wisdom of the Maori people in that design. Of course, we have, Mahatma Gandhi, Thich Nhat Hanh, the Dalai Lama, and all these great teachers in the region who I feel, we've often missed in some of the emerging movements of regeneration now. And it's really great that it's now inspiring us to bring these wisdom traditions back. And it also invites us to look into how do we decolonize change making and development. So for me, like one experience I also have is right now. So I also want to quote Thomas when he said, what we need is a policy agenda and actionable sectoral recommendations that can harness the power of politics and institutional change to bring the transformation to another scale. Right now, we're also designing a national ecosystem restoration lab. And I've always wondered, how can we apply it to, land development plans, and how can we bring in, like, consciousness in this work? And so we're designing a learning journey where at the heart of it is regenerative leadership, and how can the leader look inside and deep within himself, and working with the Ryu and deep ecology. And then because it's in the Philippines, we're bringing in the principles of pamumuno, which our term for leadership, and it's the root word is puno, which means tree. And because we want to bring in decolonize how we're used to creating a plan, a development plan, from a linear way, but we want to bring in the approach of sensing the system and going and listening to others and building empathy. And then at the end of the day, it's also going back to the change maker and reflecting on their role in the system. And from that deeper place, design a better system together and apply it in the policies and in the restoration efforts of their landscape. So for me, that's still an ongoing journey, and I'm really inspired that it's meaningful to hear from institutions like you bringing this together and bringing a curriculum out of it and discussing the evolution of development this way. And so, yeah, I don't know how much I'm contributing to this discussion effectively.
Well,
but
that's fine, Sarah.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Sarah. And let's move. We can come back if we have time, but I noted that our time is running short. So let's move to Divya for some remarks on her perspective, on maybe the youth perspective.
Thank you, Professor Naresh Singh. So first of all, I want to start by congratulating and thanking Dr. Thomas Legrand to give us a much needed roadmap, new development model for a dimension that was missing in public policy, as Professor Naresh Singh said, spirituality. So Dr. Thomas Legrand's book starts with the quote, "The way out is in." In my view, these 5 words summarize the whole book for me. For the last 2 centuries, our attention has been mainly outwards towards GDP, economic growth, and material prosperity. I think it's time now that we turn that attention, that focus inwards. So today we will address the opportunities and the challenges faced by today's youth and how they can contribute to sustainable development through a politics of being, and more importantly, why it's very important to involve youth in these efforts. So let me start with the opportunities first. So today's youth has access to a lot of information and connection. And globalization has led to a certain kind of a homogenization of ideas to a certain extent among the younger population across the world. So compared to say 50 years ago, now there is an increased openness to new ideas. I think there is more tolerance and more empathy between people of different religions, countries, gender. And I think there is more individual freedom and choice of self-expression. The gender sensitization is also better today. And I'm comparing this in context of Asian families and communities, which anthropologically speaking are based on, not all of them, but some are based on strict adherence to traditions and values. Whether we understand those traditions or not, it doesn't matter. And applying the lessons of collectivism and sacrificing individualism. So it's a big deal if in Asian context, we can move in this direction while maintaining a sense of belonging. So not saying that collectivism is wrong, it's very good, but it's a gray area. So what is needed now is greater participation by the youth in politics and policy making. So now let me quickly come to the challenges part, because in my view, the challenges that the millennials are facing today seem to be more complex than ever, I think, in the future, like the whole of history of mankind. So in addition to the general uncertainties of life that every young adult has to go through, there is also a global culture that is strained by a toxic and unkind social media. And there are constant technological changes happening. We are witnessing a return of populism and polarization in several countries. In workplaces, there is a culture of cutthroat competition, and the education system is deteriorating day by day. So, and to pile on to all these problems, there are also global level challenges such as climate change that the youth will have to deal with in the very near future. So because of all these, countries around the world these days are facing an alarming level of mental health crisis, and youth subgroup is the hardest hit. And they're experiencing intense amount of loneliness, depression, stress, and many times they don't know how to deal with it or where to go for help. And I think it's a lot to expect from a 20-something-year-old, right? So now maybe I can discuss the most important question. What can the youth do to improve their own lives and contribute to sustainable development through a politics of being? and why is it critical to involve youth in our efforts? So let me start with the why question. Their participation is critical because more than anybody else, it will be the millennials that will have to deal with the harsh consequences of the complex problems that we are facing today. And these problems, I think, will likely intensify in the future unless we take some concrete actions and change our development model to a new one, but continuing the old one, nothing revolutionary, but including spirituality and mindfulness. So this is one reason why participation of youth is important. Another reason is that I believe the changes in values and mindsets at this age will possibly lead to a quicker transformation of institutions. And I mean the changes in institutions that are needed for sustainable development. Now, the Asian youth is in a bit of a fix here. And why I say that is because they have to navigate this situation with some additional constraints that are specific to Asia. It's because our culture and our social expectations are still quite traditional in nature, and people tend not to deviate from what is considered normal in the society. So this is where the youth has to exercise their wisdom and their courage and a little bit of fearlessness to change things for themselves and for others, so both individually and collectively. Now, how can we apply and contribute to politics of being? I think there are two ways. First is by developing our inner dimension, and second is by developing our outer dimension. And let me start with the inner one because I feel that will inspire our outer actions and behaviors. So let me quote the book again. The book says, all the problems we face come from our minds and hearts, and there also lie the solutions. So it's important that along with an understanding of the outer world, it is essential that we also come to know our inner world. Now, how do we get to know our inner world? I think practicing meditation and technique of mindfulness are quite useful. However, I do realize that it's not a one-size-fits-all solution because we are all unique. We may not like meditation, doing meditation, and we need different approaches for different people. That makes sense. So I think a general way could be to start by paying attention to our thoughts, our minds, the way we are thinking. So basically knowing ourselves really, really well. And it is key to develop complex thinking. Complex thinking entails acknowledging that everything, every event is interdependent and interconnected. And it is also necessary that we critically analyze the mass of information. Like there's so much information out there. We need to critically analyze it, the information that surrounds us. So this was inner development. It's important that we do not ignore our outer dimension as well. It's stated in the Upanishads as well. So outer dimension means our actions and our behaviors. We should scientifically investigate our outer world and check from time to time if anything is disrupting our perception of the reality. Do we have any mental biases or psychological or emotional conditionings that are preventing us from seeing the reality as it is? In our actions, we can bring a sense of inquiry and inquisitiveness. So suppose if you are studying, if you are doing research, working in research, or if you like science, maybe you can turn the lens of science inwards towards the vast territories of the psyche that are still so unexplored. And I think there's a lot to discover if we go in that dimension. Next, we can practice interbeing, as Thomas described in our daily lives. Interbeing means recognizing our relational nature as human beings, realizing the oneness, the unity between ourselves, other people, other human beings, nature, and everything that is there in the universe. So lastly, it is important that as youth, we do not get stuck in religion and tradition and understand the difference between spirituality and religion, and also the connection between them, and not succumb to religious fundamentalism because it's happening a lot all across the world, in India as well. So youth is so energetic, they want to just, march in everywhere. So it's important that you use your mind as well. So in conclusion, for us who are in our 20s, 30s, and even the teenagers, I think this is the time of our lives where we have a blank canvas, sort of blank canvas, and we have lots of energy, we have aspirations, and we want to do something useful and meaningful with our lives. So it is important that at this age, we align our actions and our goals sensibly, wisely, and towards a sustainable future. So that was Politics of Being for me. And thank you again, Dr. Thomas Legrand, for a wonderfully written piece. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Divya, for bringing a lot of energy and vitality to our conversation. Wonderful. Thanks a lot. Thomas, there are a few questions addressed to you. I don't know if you've seen them in the chat, but if you have, I can tell you how to start. And one is on mass trauma, the other one is on the role of beauty, and then some others. But you have read them, I believe. So please, over back to you.
Yes, thank you, Naresh, thank you, Divya, thank you, Sarah, for your great words, and thanks to all put their questions in the chat. So there was one from Paul Bernstein on methods for healing masses of people from the trauma wounds they carry. So I think there are two ways. One is more at the individual levels, and there are some innovations on trauma healing. I think it's a very active field, and some of this innovation indeed comes also from rediscovering traditional practices that have been developed over time to deal with these traumas. And also, I would say these individual traumas, when we talk, for example, about something like rape, or we have seen there's some, or racism, and there are some global conversations that are now happening more and more. And I see, I'm thinking about the Me Too movement, the Black Lives Matter movement. I think we are in a process, because we need to move towards a different stage. We are in a process of very intense healing, and we need to intensify even more these conversations that can bring healings to people and to societies also as a whole. There have been also dialogue process like truth and reconciliation in some countries after, for example, civil wars or important political processes. So I think this is a kind of conversation that we need to happen at different scale, at the scale of societies, maybe the scale of small circles, etc., and at as individual practices. So just a very short answer on that. There was a question also about beauty. So that's really interesting. As I said, I mentioned Platonic transcendentals, beauty, goodness, and truth, which have been said as a basis for the good society. And so Naresh was mentioning a quote at the end of the book, like a call to yearn for the endless sea. So to me, I see beauty even in this calling for a politics of being, for a new world that would stem from the best of what we are. I see beauty in that, and in a more concrete way. Definitely, beauty is very important. It educates us. It inspires to go beyond our limitations and to dream of a more beautiful world. And there are more concrete examples at the local level. I mentioned one in the book about how cleaning, repainting, remodeling a whole community was very important in terms of social outcomes there, in terms of security, etc. There is examples also, for example, of the importance of bringing green spaces in cities and the social benefits of it in terms also of criminality, etc. So definitely beauty is one of the key spiritual values, I would say, that is part of this framework on the politics of being. There was on this framework, there was another question about, because on the slide it was mentioned prosperity and abundance. So there was a question about why is that, or is that different from economic growth? So I would say abundance is a spiritual quality that is part of a spiritual process that happens in lives when we evolve spiritually, but it's an abundance that is spiritual in nature and not necessarily material. So I think there's probably a confusion about how this has shown up in terms of a focus on economic growth. So I would say abundance is definitely something positive we should keep on, but we don't need to think necessarily that it's in such a materialistic way as with economic growth.
Thomas, if I might,
yeah?
I think you're talking about an abundance of truth, love, and beauty.
Yeah, we could say that. We could say that, and I say on, just to clarify also on economic growth. I don't say economic growth is a bad thing. And see, what I say is that when you put that above all the rest, then it's not the right hierarchy of things. So it's good to have some degree of material abundance that is compatible with our ecological limits, but it's not the highest good. And what we need, as you said, now more abundance of all these spiritual qualities that you mentioned, Naresh. There was some other question. Eric from
on technology. We are getting so connected to technology, we are getting disconnected from ourselves. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, definitely. So what's the way out? I think it's just a recognition. There's a lot of, to me, the politics of being is a manifestation somehow of truth, let's say. So it's about that all systems are based on lies, or lies about what makes us happy, what is success, etc. And when we recognize that, these social media, technology tools are not really conducive to our well-being, well, we tend to naturally leave that. But if our systems, if our societies, if our laws and policies, support that, that becomes become easier. And we could design social medias in a way that supports cultivating the best in ourselves. And there are some platforms that does that. The problem is that the major platforms are designed on the contrary to support the worst in us, or lies, overreactions, outrage, etc. So we could design them, and we should develop rules that would use the power of social media in a positive way.
The other question, Thomas, was how one can visualize the role of spirituality in development if we consider it devoid of time and space. So I guess the it there is, if we consider spirituality devoid of time and space, how can we make the link to development?
It's a little bit theoretical in my part. So obviously, I think there's a big question about how do you make the link. I mean, spiritual teachings can be very confusing at times because the ultimate reality is beyond our understanding. But what we have developed is a wisdom on how to apply these insights in a way that can make sense for our lives and for our societies. So there's a lot of people who have shown us the way, and I think we need to, really look into their teaching, thinking about, Gandhi, for example, in Asia and India. So yeah, just be very. I think the danger is to a little bit to be too theoretical when you try to link, because that's could be confusing. But when we try to see, what that can mean for societies, for development, then we can have a conversation that is a bit more concrete, and I think we can agree on what is a good pathway.
If I might add to that, Thomas. The connection that I make is that, see, eternity, which is the absolute expanse, no limits in time, is that the mind conceptualizes time because of its own limitations. It cannot conceive of eternity. Similarly, the mind, because of its own limitations, conceives infinity in terms of space. the recognition or the realization of the limitations of the human mind then liberate us to understand the relationship between the mind-body world, or the world of development, and the spiritual dimensions that we can become aware of. That's how I make those connections. But I think people are thanking you for answering all the questions. I think you have, if I check here.
Thomas,
Oh, there were some, sorry, there were some from our colleague in the Jindal School of International Affairs. And those, I can tell you quickly, Thomas. One was, did you engage, you know, the famous book by Erich Fromm, To Have or To Be? So the question to you is, did you engage, did you get inspired by the work of Erich Fromm? The second question is, do you put a premium on changing consciousness rather than the macro change of oppressive social structures like caste and class and gender? Or do you argue, one second, or do you argue for interaction between the two? And then finally, are excerpts of your book available? And that will wrap it up. I think that covers all the questions.
I think there is one more question in the question and answer tab. And it says, I'm somewhat hesitant to put a lot of faith in youth, while we are definitely seeing some encouraging youth movements, example, the climate.
Okay, so we'll turn to you to answer that one, Divya.
So it's
before you do it, let Thomas finish those answers about Erich Fromm and so on. Thomas, you want to quickly?
Sure. So definitely on the free, there's a free accept available on the website politicsofbeing.com. There are some blogs, also a lot of information, where there's a YouTube channel also with more comprehensive presentations, etc. I've just bought Erich Fromm's book, so I've not read it yet, but I've been told it would be very aligned with my reflection. So that was also a good, very good question about the relationship, and I do, you know, articulate the inner and the outer. So you know, mentioning, you know, the very relevance of all these social issues on caste, gender, or any kind of oppression. It's part of what we can call building a culture of peace, where we end up all these kind of oppressions, which are really not conducive to any to a collective well-being. And I use this quote from Amma in the book, saying, you know, there's two forms of poverty in the world. There is one of, you know, lacking food, shelter, etc., material poverty, and there's a poverty of the heart, and we need to address both. But we say by addressing the poverty of the heart, or the being, we can is the key to address the other. So that's a little bit how I approach that.
Thanks. Divya, you want to take a minute and answer that question?
I was hoping maybe Thomas can answer that question. It says, I am somewhat hesitant to put a lot of faith in youth, while we are definitely seeing some encouraging youth movements. If anything, today's youth are in large more aspirational and invested in consumerism, etc. Of course, the outcome of dominant paradigm, but it's an unfortunate reality. So I want to
ask Thomas then. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I want to hear
what Thomas has to say. Thomas, over to you.
Yeah, so, you know, there's a long-term perspective in the politics of being. We have a lot of short-term, very, you know, on the climate, for example, we have a lot of short-term decisions to take, but we don't need also to lose a longer-term perspective. So my sense is that this is a shift of consciousness, a cultural shift that we can do in one generation, and that goes a lot through the youth, educating them differently, being more present for them in the family to give them good basis. And yeah, no, as Divya said, the teenagehood and early young adult is a moment where you can really more easily shift people consciousness and put them in a different path for them to grow as adults. So I do believe a lot on the youth to take up this message. I talk about in the book, or how did I feel myself as a young people, and how I choose to walk a path with heart, which is an expression I found on my path. And I think that's a core that youth can really relate to. As Divya said, it's a very difficult also age, but I hope that there's the energy, and if that with the right inspiration, they can overcome a lot of the hurdles and challenges you face as young people. So definitely that's our hope for the future.
Thank you so much, Thomas. And by some miracle, we have come just to the right point of time when we are wrapping this up. Let me encourage all our participants to take a look at politicsofbeing.com and support the movement towards this revolution. Also take a look at the Center for Complexity Economics, Applied Spirituality and Public Policy, CASP, at the AOP Jindal Global University, where we are starting this revolution here in Asia, and we are wanting to make the link with our colleagues in Europe and elsewhere. So Thomas's movement and ours, we hope to hold hands and strengthen each other as we go forward. I will give the final word to our Dean to wrap up in a minute or so. Dean, back to you.
Well, thank you. I just have to say thank you. It's been a lot of appreciation for the insights that you've elaborated from the book, and everybody would be keen to read it. I was particularly struck by your reference to outcomes of truth and reconciliation. See, these are things that I think in the conflict-ridden situation that we now have, we must provide fora, convene platforms for people with very different views to come. I mean, I was reminded of you also made a reference to, justice, restorative justice. Albie Sachs once said that, the modern courts look for microscopic truth. Did this something happen? Is there evidence for it? Then he makes a big reference to Gandhiji, who titled his autobiography, My Experiments with Truth, which is a kind of an experiential grasp of truth in one's own conscience, right? So I think that is a good discipline to do what Gandhi did, which is to to examine his own life. And it's said that the unexamined life is not worth living. And then Albie Sachs makes a reference to what is called the dialogic truth. That's the one that emerges when you have, these different viewpoints, people who have reason to think that they hate the other person, and to then realize the interconnectedness and the commonality of humanity. So I think these are very practical ways forward. In a number of contexts, we can experiment with them, even within a university setting. So it's been very inspiring, and thank you very much, Thomas, for a super summary and an encouragement for us to read and reread and reflect upon thoughts in your book. Thank you.
Well, thanks again to all our participants for actively engaging with this. Thanks to Thomas for writing the book, first of all, and then sharing with us today. And my colleague panelists, Sarah, Divya, thank you guys all so much. Take good care now. Thanks. That brings us to an end. Thomas will be in touch to continue our partnership.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, Naresh, for
Thank you,
making
everyone.
this happen.
Thank you,
And your
Naresh.
team.
Thank you so much. Are we closing or?
Yes. I think we can. We have closed, and Professor Naresh Singh and Dean also left, so I think we are good.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thanks, Thomas. Thanks, Divya.
And
Thank you
thanks.
both. Good to be with you. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.